the issue of how do hard-pressed feature writers find a way to make it into TV. So this will be what I hope is the beginning of a series of events and discussions on the issue. I want to start tonight with just some numbers, because you've all had the anecdotal experience of how much harder it is to get a feature writing job these days than in TV. And so I want to look at it. 2007 was the absolute height of the feature writing market. In 2007, right before the financial crisis, there were more TV writers than feature writers. That makes sense, of course, because there are TV staffs. Back then, there was 66% more writers in the WGA who worked in TV than in film. Today, there is 200% more TV writers than in film. Back then, despite those numbers, film writers made 16% more total earnings that year than TV writers. Today, TV writers earn twice as much total earnings than film writers. If you look at how many WGA writers have worked in film this current year, it's about 22% of WGA members have worked in film, which actually is not that much of a change in the past few years. It's just down about 6 points. But of all of the money that they have brought into the Guild, in 2007, 45% of Guild earnings were TV earnings. Today, it's well over 2/3. So if you don't believe there has been a change, there has definitely been a change. Those are the numbers to back it up. The question is, what do we do about it? And, you know, my off-the-cuff calculation is you pretty much have three options. Number one, you double down, work twice as hard in your feature career, write specs, do anything you can to wait out the market. Number two is you give up everything to transition into TV, because that's how much effort it takes. Or number three, you try to do both. And the goal for tonight is to walk away with a clearer sense of which path you want to take and the steps that you can pursue in order to do that. And to quote the geologist and scourge of the religious right, Charles Darwin, it is not the most intelligent or strongest who survives, it is those most capable of change. So with that, I want to introduce our ringleader for tonight is going to be Glen Mazzara. I will leave you the bio for you to read yourself on his amazing career. I do just want to say he and I came together because of the amazing amount that he gives back to feature writers. We connected on this issue because he was organizing a new training program for newbie TV writers, how to actually hold on to the job once they got it. And that's just the minimum of everything else he's done. Please welcome Glen Mazzara.
Is this on? Hi, everybody. How are you? Why don't I just pull out the panelists? Everybody come on out, and I'll have everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll I'll ask some questions, and then we'll get to questions. There's a lot of people here, so I'm sure a lot of people have questions. So I want this to be as interactive and make sure that it's as beneficial for everyone here as possible, okay? So let's go down the line this way. Nicole, why don't you introduce yourself and just, say what's going on.
You're just going to do your job. You're supposed to
Yeah, I'm
introduce.
supposed to do my job. Yeah, but go ahead.
I'm Nicole Clemens. I'm a Senior VP of Series Development at FX and run comedy and drama for FX Networks.
I'm Graham Yost, and I'm the showrunner on Justified.
I'm Ian Dietchman. I'm a writer on Parenthood and a feature writer still.
And I'm Kristin Robinson, and I write with Ian Dietchman on Parenthood and in features.
And I'm Larry Shuman, and I run a management firm, the Shuman Company, which has been around a little over 20 years.
Okay, so my first question is for Nicole. Nicole, last year I wrote a pilot for FX. You guys passed. And my question is, what the fuck? So,
Did not have.
Okay, pull out your pitchforks now. Let's get it. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm sure there's a few people in here who've passed on. Thanks, Glenn.
Larry, you represent how many writers and how many are film and TV, and what are you seeing as you manage different careers?
Well, we represent probably about 100 writers, and the lion's share of the careers and the thrust of their careers is originally in the staffing business. We have people who come out of the feature business. I would say probably about 25% are still very, very active in the feature business. Probably there's a lot of the other percentage would be available. They would love to do features. Just a matter of when you're working in network television, 45, 46, 47-hour weeks a year, it's hard to lift your head and do something else.
And has it always been that way, or have you seen more of a shift? I mean, we heard some of the numbers, and do you have people who are solely doing features?
Yes. We have people solely doing features who that's all they do. I think that nowadays it's hard to have, it depends upon the client. I mean, some people have the ability to juggle and handle several things, features and TV. It's, I think, easier if you're on a cable show and the order is somewhere, on the average 13 episodes. Sometimes there may be 15 or 16, but doing 13 episodes is a different year than doing usually 22 or 23 or whatever on a network show. So I think that's a big, big factor in their ability to develop for TV and or features, for sure.
And Graham, you started in features and then made the move to TV?
I actually started in TV, made the move to features, then came back to TV.
Okay, so what
I started out writing for, the golden age of television, the first scripted show on Nickelodeon, Hey Dude.
classic.
People say this is the golden age. That was the gold. And then lasted for 9.5 weeks on Full House. I quit 4 days before I was going to be fired. And right around that time, sold Speed. I did another stint on a half-hour show called The Powers That Be that Norman Lear was producing, which was a great experience. But then Speed came out, and I went fully into movies. And I know this whole panel is about, going from features into TV, and this is how things have changed in 20 years, which is when I left Full House and then got the sold Speed, and that went forward. A couple years after that, I happened to be over at Warner Brothers, and Full House was there at the time. And I decided to look up the writer's room and go in. And half of the people were there I remember, who had been on staff when I'd been there. And they looked at me like, how is it out in the world? What's it like in the promised land of features? And, jump forward, let's say 15 years from that, and I run into feature writers, and they're saying, what's it like in television where you can write that stuff? So that's how it's changed in 20 years.
So when you wrote Speed, was it on assignment or it was?
No, it was a spec.
Okay, and so then after that, then you stayed in features for a while, and you were both writing original material, or everything was on assignment, or you were doing rewrite work. What kind of?
I did some rewrite work. I again, classic age of cinema. I did the rewrite on Firestorm with Howie Long. Yeah, that was smart.
I missed that
It was
one.
a job. And I did some other rewrites, but it was mostly original stuff. We would pitch it. I wasn't speccing, but I was pitching and selling.
And then what was the shift or the drawback to TV?
The drawback was simple. My agent called one day and said that my agent Karen Sage at CAA said Tom Hanks wants to do a miniseries on the history of the Apollo program. Are you in for HBO? Are you interested? I said absolutely. And so that took me back into television, and I worked on that, and then was lucky enough to work on Band of Brothers. And I'd always had a TV agent at CAA because when I started there, I was in TV. And every year, Sonia Rosenfeld would ask me, did I have something to pitch in the TV world? And I came up with this idea. It became Boomtown, a show that lasted 1.5 years on NBC. And that was the first time I was running a show. And that got me back into television, and that was really like a whole new world kind of thing to walk into that.
Okay, so there you have it. All you have to do is write a hit movie like Speed, go work for Tom Hanks, do Band
Hey, you
of
asked me to
Brothers.
be on this panel,
Listen,
okay? I mean,
listen, dude, come on, and then just get a couple of shows on the air. So, all right, that's very helpful, Graham. Thank you. Ian and Kristin, can you tell us your story? Because you've made the shift more recently.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't do it that way. We did it another way.
No, we went the Katherine Heigl movie route. We sold a feature. our careers got kind of kick-started in the same way. We had a big feature sale, a couple of actually big feature sales, within a year and a half of each other. And the second of which was Life as We Know It, which, fast forward 10 years later, was finally made as a movie. And in between that time, we got a lot of, jobs, rewriting, selling pitches, assignments, that kind of stuff. Always had an interest in TV, but it was always kind of peripheral to features because we were doing well in features, and we're still doing features. But after our movie, apparently they stopped making movies. Ours was the last one out of the gate.
Ours was the last one of the kind of movies that Ian and I write, like a romantic dramedy. The studios don't make those.
Oddly enough, you would think they would be knocking those. It's so, once the movie came out, we really just made, getting into TV much more of a priority. And we made it a priority we had moved to a new agency, and we kind of made them know when we moved there that it was a priority to us. And we had kind of taken out pilot ideas here or there, but, and we still had that idea, but was also like, what could we do to get on staff? Because we just felt like we want to learn that end of the business. I don't want to do all the talking. I'm sorry. I don't mean that.
That's all right.
I don't mean to do all the
So
talking.
we decided to write something specifically for television, a pilot. We wanted it. We thought about it a lot, and we wanted to be sure that it reflected our voice, what we could do, and put that out in the world as a calling card, and see what would come of it. And it was read by Michelle Lee, who is Jason Kadam's director of development. We had met her years ago when she was working in features. She loved it. She gave it to Jason. He had us come in and sit down. Initially we thought maybe he was interested in the pilot, but it turns out he was interested in us for Parenthood, for staffing on Parenthood. And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it unlike features, it was, it was 4 days and we were done. It was like, oh yeah, Jason will meet with you. It was on Friday. Jason will meet with you on Monday. Oh, great. Our agent, who could probably be my son, he's was like, this is the 5th season. He's going to want to hear lots of ideas. And I drove Kristin crazy, like, all weekend. What, we need more. What about a Jabbar idea? What can we do with Jabbar? And he didn't want to hear any ideas. He just wanted to talk to us.
He just wanted to see if he could be in a room with us for many hours a day, for many days a week. And he clearly decided that he could. We started at the bottom. We started as staff writers. It was made very clear to us that although we had 10 years of writing experience in features,
and a recently produced
movie. There were plenty of people behind us who would be more than happy to have this job, and we needed to prove that we could write for this medium, for television.
Yeah.
And
Let me ask, what was the draw to TV? Why did you want to go? Were you just looking for? It sounds like you had some stability in your career.
Well,
You were doing well. So was it that you were hitting a dry spell, or did you just say, I like TV better, and we want to write that
there was a little bit. I mean, I think everybody has been hitting a dry spell in that what used to be like, okay, it's maybe 13 months between feature gigs is now more like 19 months, or sometimes I know plenty of people where it's worse. And what used to be your quote, there's no such thing as quotes anymore. And so it just, we both have kids, and it's like, how do you want to know that you're going to be able to have a stable income and all of that. And it's just becoming harder and harder as a middle-class feature writer to be able to do that, frankly, for everybody.
It felt like assignment work and that kind of thing. We would be going up for jobs that would then just disappear.
Yeah.
We'd move all the way up the food chain, and then someone at the studio would decide, you know what, we don't want to make this anymore.
Thank you. You totally showed us why we don't want to make this movie.
And,
We didn't see it until you put it into perfect. That is the best version of that movie. We're not going to do that.
And the one big produced feature credit we had was 10 years from we sold it to when it was made. So when we got on Parenthood and we wrote a script, and then 3 months later they shot it, and then a month after that it was on the air, we were like, oh my God, this is so much more creatively satisfying by far.
The other thing I'll say is I was on the WGA board, and all the numbers that Ari was throwing at you, I was literally hearing for 4 years. And it was just like, features is we've got to do something. We can't just be in. We're still doing features, and we want to be doing both. And I think any writer who, unless you're running a show, unless you're really in either that top bracket, you have to be doing both.
Nicole, what are you seeing? Because obviously, FX does a type of is a type of brand that's probably closer to a lot of these independent films that maybe are not getting made as much anymore. A lot of the character work is I think being done on cable TV. So are you the people coming in and pitching to you, the people that are being submitted to you, both for staffing on shows, are you seeing that they're experienced TV writers, or are you seeing more, feature writers, and does that make a difference to you?
Well, what really makes a difference is whether or not they are a really muscular character writer. And FX is kind of like a film studio in that we don't care if the idea comes from a novelist or a journalist or a brand new feature writer or a seasoned television writer who's reinventing themselves. I mean, it really is about that. I mean, all of our shows are so kind of auteur driven. It's about that passion, and then do they have the chops to do it? Really happy to find somebody who's never done it before and support them. The premium's on originality. So if you find that voice and you feel like they have the chops, we'll take that shot. And a lot of feature writers, a lot. Obviously my background for the last 16 years was film, so have been pulling from a lot of those people. But I would say I don't know if I could give you percentages, but a lot.
Okay, and Graham, when you hire writers, are you looking for, obviously, you're probably looking for the best writer, but are you seeing a lot of, feature writers? Are you reading feature writers? And when you, are you hesitant to bring feature writers onto a staff, for example? I mean, yes, they might be original, but they might also need a certain amount of training that perhaps TV writers might have. So what's your experience when you're staffing?
First of all, I don't want to hire writers that are better than me. That's the first thing. I need to feel that. No, listen, I think any, yeah, I think that any, I mean, you know what it's like. It's all about the material and then do you want to be in a room with them for 10 hours a day? So I've read, the preponderance, and Jeff Melvoin and I were talking about this. It's actually the last panel I was on here about how you need to read original pilots now, because there's no point in me reading an episode of The Good Wife. I don't follow the show. I hear it's fantastic, but that doesn't necessarily translate. You're looking for that original vision. If what is the kind of show that you want to see? So you're looking for that thing that you think might fit, because all the shows are so different now. Just think of the shows on FX, and I've been paid to only speak about shows on FX. So, yes, absolutely. No, but I mean, it's just, so much of it is guesswork and trying to read a couple pieces. But one of the first hires we made in the first season was this guy, Ben Cavell, who was a novelist, and had written short stories. And he had written one original pilot about a murder squad in Boston in the 1840s, the first detectives in America, basically. And it was just really good, smart writing. And then we met with him, and, he turned out to be one of the writers that saved the show. That first season when you don't know exactly what you're doing and who's going to be strong and who's not. And, he wrote an outline, and it was like, okay, that's great. I'm going to put you on this script right now. So he was a novelist. In terms of feature writers versus TV writers, I've read, this is the other thing though, is when you're reading a lot of people, if you're reading a lot of features, it's like, oh my God, it's 120 pages, I'd like to read half-hour writers, because it's going to be a short read. No, but part of it is that it's like, okay, the first 10 pages better just be fantastic, or I'm not going to read the next 110.
And Ian and Kristin, when you decided to make the move, what did you think you needed to learn? How did you set out? What was your plan? Because I'm sure that's hopefully interesting to people here. What did you say? Like, okay, what kind of material did you need? Did you try to target shows? Did you, what kind of guidance did you get from your reps?
Well, I mean, when we spoke to our reps about it, you know, I've heard from a number of features, and we even got this a few years ago, pushback about like, you're not going to make any money at first. You're really, so I think it's important for any feature writer that I've spoken to is like, well, my reps don't really want me to do it. It's like, if you want to do it, you have to tell them this is a priority. Like, we want to not just try to sell a spec pilot, but we also want to go out for staffing, and we're taking that very seriously. So we asked them what would we need to do, and they said, if you wanted to do that, you need to write a pilot to show people that you can write TV. And, you know, we had a couple of ideas. As Kristin said, one that we started writing had a more of a high concept fantasy element to it, and we decided there's so much exposition doing this, it's not really showing off our voices. Let's just write something that really does that, and that we were really passionate about the idea. We started meeting, basically, we wrote down a list of every single TV writer that we knew. And from, some big kahunas at the top that I was fortunate enough to meet through WGA service, but mostly just working writers, and then started reaching out to them, even when we were writing our pilot, like, can you just give us advice? How do we do this? What is the and got some tremendous advice from people.
Well, share it, please.
Well, it was just like one of the, I'm not going to name names, but it was like, one was like, there was a certain showrunner that were like, here was my bad experience with the showrunner where I blew a meeting. It was basically like, I had an interview, and I realized afterwards, if that person starts talking, let them talk.
Was that showrunner Graham Yost?
Yeah, it is. The guy just would not shut up, and I had important things to say.
So it was a lot of things like that. It was kind of.
We read a lot too. We read everything we possibly could of the kinds of pilots, shows that we liked, shows that we thought were similar to our voice, just to educate ourselves, to see what that structure looked like differently, as different from a feature screenplay.
Yeah, and we certainly had targeted Jason as like at the top of the list. I mean, when we had that meeting with him, we basically said this was the meeting we wanted to have. So we feel like we've already succeeded because.
You said that in the meeting?
We said that.
We did.
How do you think that went, Graham?
Sorry. I say, man.
Sitting right next to you.
But I'm very excited to meet you now.
Larry, how do you...
Blue with Graham Yost.
Larry, if you have clients who say, okay, well, one is... When do you ever suggest to somebody, why don't you look at TV? It's not happening for you in features, okay? I mean, I'm sure maybe you have some people who keep pitching ideas and you say, that feels like a TV idea, And then how do you guide somebody through the process? How do you counsel them? What do you try to teach them? Do you put them together with other writers? How do you feel it's best to manage it?
A lot of good things have been mentioned here as far as reaching out to, people they know, getting advice. As far as material goes, Graham mentioned as far as like I guess right now the sweet spot has been for X number of years has been pilots. As far as like maybe the kind of the leading writing sample, we try to really try to understand what that specific showrunner, where their sweet spot is, and everyone's got a different thing. Some people really are into reading plays. Some people really want to read pilots. Some people will read features, but that's probably a smaller number. But if you have a portfolio where you've got some great material, you can work it. And there are really showrunners who will read, in addition to a pilot or in addition to a play, they'll read a spec of a show. And even though that's not really kind of in vogue now, I do feel that it helps the portfolio where maybe the lion's share of the people we're pitching as showrunners are not going to read that spec, but it helps when 20% of the shows we're going out to, which is not a big number, might want to read that spec as a backup sample. And it could be something that, or maybe it's a favorite sample of an executive that has, some sort of input or juice with the showrunner. So there's a lot of ways of sort of like, I think, positioning and getting the writer in front of the showrunner.
And then are you reading multiple drafts of people's work and giving notes and advice, and how do you guide them through the process of developing material to go out for TV gigs?
We are definitely heavily involved with that. Honestly, you try to get a temperature of, it depends on like if it's a newer writer, somebody who hasn't, taken a stab at samples, you get a feel for who can rewrite themselves well, who can take notes well, who can process that well, and we try to be as involved as they want us. I mean, sometimes we're heavily involved, sometimes a little bit less, but we try to develop definitely the drafts with the writers for sure. And don't take it out too soon.
Okay.
Do not expose it too soon.
Do you find people are jumping to, they feel it's ready to go before you do sometimes?
Yes, not a lot, but sometimes, and it's just being honest and just say, I think they're really, just take a step back, and I think you could really do some more work on this. And maybe we see it as, a 10 to 20% factor, or even 5 to 10%, but we'd like to, really kind of bear down and get it as strong as we can before it's exposed.
Right. And Nicole, are you reading younger writers or beginning, like to familiarize yourself with writers, or are you strictly, you have people working in your department who's screening and you're just reading stuff purely for consideration for development?
No, absolutely. If someone I respect, like Larry, calls me up and says, look, I have this new writer, you've got to read them, you've got to meet them, I'll absolutely read. I mean, it's so competitive out there. As you heard the numbers, there's 300 scripted shows. And yes, we're FX and people want to be on the network, but we want to get there first and we want to develop those relationships. So that is incumbent upon us to actually go out and find and identify. I call a lot of feature agents because I know from working in an agency that the film side doesn't always talk to the TV side, and the TV side might represent the film client, but they don't actually know them, never have spoken to them. So I call a lot of feature agents and sort of give them the spiel of what it is that I'm looking for in a writer in general, or what an FX writer might be, and and try to discover people. I think my husband's here tonight with, I think, is Jerry here? I've never met Jerry. Jerry Shandy actually was a younger writer. There he is right there, who one of my staff actually discovered and brought up and mentioned, and now he's on Vaughn's staff.
So what would you say are common mistakes that people are making in the material? Because I think to get in the door, it has to be on the page. That's the number one thing, and it's easier said than done. But, I just staffed a show and read, like 120 writers, and there's a lot of, very, very good writers out there, but I find people are making similar mistakes. I'll talk about that in a sec, but what do you think? I mean, it's easy to say, oh, I want something original, I want something that pops, but is there practical advice that we can give people who are working on their material that you find a lot of scripts kind of do this, and I wish they did that, or something?
Absolutely. I would say, look, for us, we look at our pilots as, if you're a feature writer, the second act of a movie. Crash in, have a really compelling teaser. Know what you're writing about. We always talk about a question that commonly comes up in pitches, for example, but it's something that you can glean from reading a spec script, is there's a real indication of that there's a long character arc there, because we're ultimately doing like 91-hour character movies, right? So in order to build a bridge, you have to know where each end is and then build to the middle. And I'm not saying you have to know what's going to happen exactly to Walter White at the end of the last episode of the last, season, but you do thematically know where your character's going. Because for us, that character's in the forefront. And I think, look, as an agent, I took a lot of feature writers into TV, and as an executive, I see a lot of this. It's a completely sort of inverted process. It's not starting with the idea or the world, and especially for cable, I get a lot of calls saying, what are you looking for? And we're not like NBC looking for 2 cop shows and a medical show. We're looking for a great character journey. The genre is just the container. It's that Trojan horse that gets subverted that carries in the character and the theme that it's about. So, and I think, honestly, the best shows, you see, it's like the showrunners working out something out of their psyche. Do you know what I mean? It's like therapy, right? And it's like you feel, like, it's why what, when you think of Kurt Sutter, you know what a Kurt Sutter show is, or Graham. I'm not going to get into that next to Graham. But he'll completely disagree with me.
No, but I can tell you how to sell a show to FX. So
please tell me how to sell a show to FX.
Is this going to involve Shakespeare templates?
Because apparently that didn't work out last year. I'm so sorry.
What's the secret?
So I'd written the first draft of what became Justified, and based it on this novella by Elmore Leonard. So we had the story. I just retyped Elmore Leonard. It was the easiest job I ever had. But at the end of it, you know, I could feel that Landgraf was looking for something a little more. And I joked in a phone call, I said, oh, you FX guys, you'd only be happy if at the end of the episode, Raylan goes home down into the basement and there's a 19-year-old boy chained to the wall, you know. Then you got a series on FX, and there was muted laughter. But then we came up with this final scene where, you know, his ex-wife says, Raylan, you're the angriest man I've ever known. I just made that shit up to sell the show. And then suddenly now we have to do a whole 6 years of the angriest man she's ever known. But that does, there is a little bit of, you know, well, who's your audience? You know, if you're selling something to HBO, that's probably similar to FX, but it's going to be different from any number of other places. And what are they kind of looking for? And at that point, FX, and still to a degree, has this, you know, they've made their bones with these edgy characters. So we needed to, Raylan was a hero, and we needed to find an edge to him.
And are you reading a lot of other writers now? Are you involved in staffing? Ian and Kristin, are you?
We're gonna be. You mean as far as shows and stuff? We're about to start that process. We're just in the middle of finishing up a feature thing,
okay.
but we're still on the show till December, so
Right.
through December.
Okay.
But no, I mean I'll say this: that from a feature writer perspective, as far as going on staff, the revelation I think was that it's much more like real job hunting than it is, you know, features. It's kind of like, oh, we're hearing 6 takes, 20, and you know, and you kind of go in and pitch your ideas, and you're affable and all that, and then it gets whittled down. Whereas, you know, part of that strategy, part of that process was once we had a pilot script, once it was done, and we actually had gotten notes from some writer friends, and we knew it was in really great shape, and our agents, you know, kind of were all on the same page, like, all right, this really works. We got it to as many writer friends as possible and basically said, we're going to be going out for staffing in the next couple of months. Can, you know, first of all, it was kind of like, what advice do you have? That kind of stuff, which was very helpful. But then it was also like, could we use you as a reference if we get an opening? And inevitably, most people would say yes. And then I would follow that, or Kristin would follow that with, thank you. But before I would ask you to actually be a reference, I'd like you to read us because we feel really confident about our script. We're really excited about it. Would you be willing to read it? Oh, sure. And so then when the Jason Kadam's job came up, you know, we were able to pull a trigger and have a number of people kind of put in calls and referrals, and they all had read our script. So we had done a lot of work to kind of line up for when the opportunities hopefully came. I think that helped a lot. It was very different.
Let me just say what I found when I was reading material, and I hope this was helpful, but I do think, you know, Nicole is right that it's not about the world or the situation. And when I read a lot of original material from people who are trying to break in, it feels like a setup, and I'm not seeing a lot of payoff within the 60 pages of the scripts that I'm reading. So first of all, you do have to, you know, in your original material, consider that TV is about, you know, and I've said this 1,000 times, maybe you've heard me say it in other panels, it's cool people doing cool shit every week. That's the secret to TV. So you have to have a cool character. You know, Tony Soprano is the most interesting character in his world. He just chews up everything, and you want to see him do it again next week. Jack Bauer, Raylan Givens, any characters that we, you know, Vic Mackey, any characters that we care about. And so what I see in a lot of scripts is that people are kind of having a character and they get in an interesting predicament, a situation, and then it cuts out, and it's going to be really cool on fictional page 700. Okay, and so when you talk to the writers about this material, and I've met with many writers over the past year and a half, you know, people say, oh, yeah, well, I'm setting this up, and this is going to be a payoff, and it's going to be season 2. No. Anyone I hired got it on the page. You got 60 pages. That's what you've got. Okay, if you can't tell a story on 60 pages that's really cool, that I say, wow, I want to see what that person does with the next 60 pages, you're not going to get a job. You want to land it on within that script. We all know how to do that. And then, but don't leave it hanging too much. You know, you want something that you want the person wanting more, but you don't want to end on a cliffhanger, end with, oh, it's going to be really cool in the fictional season finale when the person really finds out. I mean, just think about the shows that we watch. If Kevin Spacey on House of Games, he does fucked up stuff every week, and there's a lot of story, and then he comes back the next week and he does it. Just write that down. Do that.
You actually reminded me of something that I think is helpful for cable. Because a lot of people will pitch a team or a unit to us, and I always try to say the difference between like a network character, and not all network characters, but a large majority, versus like a cable character like a Tony Soprano or a Jax Teller, is that yes, 24 is serialized, it's dark, he's a screwed up character. You could probably see that on FX, even more violence, even more whatever, psychosis. But Jack Bauer reacts to plot. And the characters that we're talking about in that novelistic form are driving plot through that character journey. So Tony Soprano has a nervous breakdown, seeks therapy, subverting the mob genre, because no mob character's ever done that. And every decision he makes is all through that lens of, as my life evolves, as I potentially evolve, which he really didn't evolve that much, but as I delude myself that I may be, my life is falling apart. So that, I feel like, or Walter White, I don't want to ruin his, isn't hopefully everyone's seeing Breaking Bad, but like,
I think it's okay.
I'm doing it for them, I'm doing it for them, I'm doing it for them, I did it for myself. You know what I mean? And so every decision, there was tons of story, tons of energy, tons of velocity, but it was all through that lens.
You want to showcase the character. I mean, the Justified pilot is a fantastic pilot, and it opens with a very long sequence of just two guys sitting at a table. Right? It's just two guys sitting at a table, and it's a great scene. It's very compelling. I don't remember how much it drives story. I think it just kind of gets him into another situation. But it's just putting your central character on stage and just letting him do his thing. I mean, it's really, I'm not just kissing your ass. I really do love that scene. But in The Sopranos, you have Tony Soprano. In the pilot, he goes into, if everybody remembers, he's chasing the ducks. He goes into the pool in his bathtub. Okay? That's a very filmic scene. That's not a very, plot TV scene, but there's a certain amount of artistry there. And so I would say that most people are really concentrating on kind of hitting all the points of what they think TV is, but it's not, then there's no surprise. And so I would say kind of slow down, push in, and really examine your characters. I don't know. What do you guys think? Am I making sense or not?
I mean, for me, I think it's so much of it is also what you guys are kind of talking about is creating a pilot that has a real emotional life to it. I mean, creating characters that they make you laugh, they piss you off, but you understand and can connect with them emotionally. I mean, I think that's what we did right. I know that's what Jason responded to, and I think, that's kind of what we do in features. It's just they don't do that a lot in movies anymore, the studios. But I think that's I think that's what you're talking about, right?
I would just add one thing, not to throw a curveball in, but years ago in the TV business, some of the biggest writers in television wrote for many seasons when there was literally 30, 35 episodes in a season. Stephen Bochco, I think, wrote 400 episodes of TV before he wrote his first pilot. And what's happening is that there are a lot of people that are being, I think, I wouldn't say forced, but are attempting to write pilots so early in their careers. It's like they don't realize how high the bar is. And I don't mean to be discouraging anybody from writing pilots. I just think that sometimes the reality doesn't match with the expectation. So what happens is that people write pilots, and it's like, great, show me your fifth pilot. I mean, you have to keep practicing at this, and I just feel that there are people who haven't been either on staff and have gotten to become better writers, and then so they don't have that experience. And now there can be a writer like Ben Cavell who wrote a pilot early on, and there are people who write pilots that are really fantastic. It's just, I think, threading the needle a little bit early on in the career. Mm-hmm. So it's like you have to keep at it. My message is, or my point is, you have to really keep practicing.
Well, the difference is in film, you can sell a bad script with a great idea, but in TV, you're not going to sell a good idea with a bad script.
Larry, do you find that a lot of writers are then thinking, okay, I wrote this pilot, did it sell? They're sending it out, and do you see it more like, do you do you really think that a lot of the original pilots you're going to sell, or do you think that they are good samples to get the writer known and start to build relationships within the TV world?
If you have the right sample, and we want to sell stuff, but we think, just like I'm sure Nicole had when she was an agent, we think we've got some amazing spec pilots that are like, we think should be, the top shows on television. That's how we feel. Not about everything, but about certain things. I think that, if somebody really sort of has a grasp, a little sense of reality, then they're hoping that this script that they write will move them forward as a writer. Mm-hmm. And when Sean Ryan wrote the spec which is essentially was a spec. We had a blind deal to write The Shield for a small amount of money, but it was for FTVS. That was not even the scripted business. So it was essentially a spec. And basically he wrote it to get work in development. That was his goal. It was not ever like, are you guys going to get this on the air for me? That was never, ever his expectation.
Right. Everybody here has seen the Shield pilot, I hope, right? Okay. So Sean wrote that when we were on staff at Nash Bridges, and I told him, this ending is a big mistake. You should
Appreciate your help.
Yeah, I was
always.
just like, I don't know what you're doing. But anyway, so once again, I was wrong. Larry, can you just talk a little bit about the calendar that people need to be mindful of? Sure. About if they are looking for staffing,
right.
and do you think how do you know when, do you ever advise writers like, what writers are going to be fine on network, what writers should be or have more of a cable sensibility? Do you guide them separately or differently?
Well, I think that some people, obviously, it depends on the material, can go both ways, and some people think they're in a cable sensibility, and some people, it kind of cuts both ways. But as far as staffing and the calendar goes, there are a little bit of two calendars. There's still network television, which basically primarily shoots pilots in the spring. And so a lot of people think, well, if I get a script to you in April or March, you can submit me. And I'm like, well, we really want to be submitting you 2 years earlier. We want to be setting you up with relationships. And obviously, we've been fortunate to get people staffed very quickly in various situations. But I'd say for somebody, at the very, 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 latest, I want to be setting the material out in the fall when people in development are waiting for their scripts to come in. They're more time when they can read versus taking out their scripts in February or March, where it's really kind of like jammed.
You're talking about going to
For network,
executives?
Yeah, network staffing, network staffing, exactly.
And when do you send scripts to showrunners?
Well, showrunners, it's all about your relationship with them. If they're busy, basically, writing the pilot, or if they're in the fall and then they get their pilot ordered and they're casting and their pre-production, they're going to rely on most likely their development exec or maybe their assistant to do most of the reading first, and somebody who they can rely on to basically weed out. Even if we have relationships with showrunners, if they're going to be, knee deep in, producing their pilot, they're not going to be available. So
and I'm not sure if everybody here is repped. Maybe there are some people who are not repped. So do you find that there's do you have a window in which you can send material from a new writer to reps when they're open to taking on new clients? Because I know that after a while, people have their list.
Sure,
they go into
sure.
to staffing season,
Sure.
so they don't really want to take on new clients because they know they have other people coming off shows, or a show was suddenly canceled.
Right.
So they don't want to have too many new clients going.
do you mean as far as us? You mean if we're taking a sample to an agent, or do you mean as far as us? As far as looking?
Well, I guess yeah. Trying to you're repping a young writer
Right.
who doesn't have
An agent. Right.
Is there a window where agents will take on new writers?
I think that there definitely is a window, which is basically any time between, summer all the way through the end of the year. I think once you get into January, they're going to be focused on their list. But if you have a relationship with the agent, if you have a hot writer, if you have somebody who is, in the right place at the right time, and I can make a phone call March 1st and say, you need to pay attention, or you should pay attention to this person, they will.
Right.
So it just depends. We have to be very specific.
Okay. So let's talk about, if somebody does get into TV through the pilot process, they're able to sell a pilot, that's what I think everybody's shooting for. I'm sure there's a lot of concern about, how do I make sure that what are the skills I need to execute it, to shoot the pilot? What if they bring in, a showrunner who's going to take it away from me and I get fired off my own show? What if I have a bad experience on my own show? What are some of the things, Nicole, that, if you're developing something from a feature writer who's had some success in features, they're coming over to TV, how do you look to build a team around that person so they succeed?
Look, we've all seen and heard the bad examples of people who try to take over shows, or maybe they're just hoping somebody can copy the voice, or that particular writer. I think there were a lot of feature writers when I was first putting feature writers into TV who were thinking, yeah, I'm going to sell that pilot and I'm going to be there for 2 years, I'm going to bail. And then the network was trying to find people to come in and take it over. And that kind of never really worked that well. For us, again, that premium's on the voice. So we're going to do everything we can to protect that voice, give them, and Graham can really speak to this through the Americans, but we want to give them training wheels. We want to support them, and it's imperative that they be able to become showrunners. We won't actually, like, for instance, on the Americans, when I got there, they were just deciding to pick it up, and I remember John basically said, I'm going to go have lunch with Joe Weisberg. I want to sit across from him. I want to look him in the eye. I want to really feel out in my gut, can this guy become a showrunner? And so the main thing is to support them with people that are going to not undermine them, but really help them do that. And you can certainly.
From what I understand in that conversation, Joe Weisberg said, John, I was with the CIA, and if you don't let me be the showrunner, you won't make it home tonight. I think it was something along those lines. No, but I mean, actually, Joe's background in the CIA had a big deal to do with it because he was writing about something that he knew, and so that world vision and his knowledge was very important. But he had also just shown throughout the process. I worked with him, and by the way, working with Joe means just reading his drafts and going, "This is amazing." I mean, he's just such a great writer. But we'd done a pilot script for FX a couple years before that called The Station. Which was just one of those things where he'd never written a script before, and his first draft was just spectacular. So I felt really blessed to be involved with that. And when we went out with the Americans, FX was the obvious place and sold it there quickly, and then the whole process of doing the pilot and then the decision about whether or not he would be the showrunner. And, John called me several times and said, do you think he has what it takes? And I said, well, it's always a guess, but the thing is that what Joe showed, what Weisberg showed throughout the whole process was the ability to take a note and elevate the script. He wouldn't just check it off. It wouldn't just be an answer. It would be, he would rethink it, and that script would just kept on getting better and better. And then, I was unavailable to work on the show, so because of Justified, but I would have loved to have worked on it with Joe. But then, we found Joel Fields, and Joel is someone that John had worked with and known quite well, and was that great, they became co-showrunners. And these guys in Brooklyn, where they do the show, they share an office. I mean, they have their desks pointing at each other. They become, joined at the hip. So that turned out to be a fantastic partnership. But that was really important casting, to get the person who knew the schedule, who knew what had to be done day by day, could keep the trains running on time. Because Joe might have been lost if he'd been thrown into that. My experience was when I got the job of running Boomtown and I sold that pilot, we were looking for the strong number 2, and it became Chris Brancato and Bert Salke as a team then. And then we also got Michelle Ashford in. So we had these really seasoned pros that could tell me how much of an idiot I was being and what I needed to do differently. And that's important, and eventually, listen, with Joe Weisberg could run his own show now. I don't know if he wants to, but he could.
So the shift, the challenge for you with Boomtown was it creatively, was your order 22?
No, our order was 13, and we ended up getting another 6 or 5 or something like that.
So now you're on a, before that, because you had done the mini series, right, which I'm sure had a long lead time. So now all of a sudden you've got a script due every 7 or 8 days, and so not only is that a big creative leap, right, because now you've got to manage writers and develop and tell a story in a much longer form, but you've also got all the management issues, and schedules and just personnel issues and all of that. So how did you approach that what did you like, where did you focus, where did you say, I'm going to worry about the creative and the other stuff gets worked out, or did you feel like you needed to have spin all plates, or what was your challenge there, and how did you approach it?
First of all, I had incredible partners to work with. John Abnett was the directing producer on the pilot, and he came on as the directing producer for the show, so I felt that was safe. Felt in really good, safe hands with our post team and all of that. And I quickly found out, for me, the job of the showrunner really came down to writing and casting and editing. And that remained true with Justified. One of the big things in Justified is Michael Dinner. Not that John was not a great editor, or working with the editors, but Dinner is just brilliant. So I don't really have to worry about that anymore. So it's really casting and writing. Now, you can be involved in everything, but then you're just going to go crazy, I think. And so it's important to hire people who know how to do those things. But you don't know, and that's the thing. I think it's better to come up and march up the ladder, and you learn all the jobs as you go along. And if you're working with a showrunner who's, say, oh, why don't you go into editing today? Why don't you handle this casting or whatever? And you get experience, then you'll have an idea of what the job is, because I didn't really entirely know. And that's where Salke and Brancato were very helpful, and Michelle Ashford and Fred Golan, really teaching me how to do the job. And it was one of those things where I didn't really realize until we were about halfway through the first season that I could do the job. You don't know, and the network didn't know, and the studio didn't know. It's like, well, we'll take a gamble, because I had the feature cred and I had the miniseries credentials. That's like, well, we kind of got to let him run the show. And it could have turned out very, very badly. Like, for example, the show could have been canceled after a year and a half. Oh.
All right, did you want to say
I
something?
just was going to say that, I mean, just sort of historically, the networks are very tougher in terms of the budgets, in terms of what they spend, in terms of their idea of using a showrunner. I mean, supposedly Les Moonves won't greenlight a pilot unless the showrunner is attached. It's way more forgiving for writers who are being in a pilot competitive situation. If you're in a cable situation, there's more opportunity for you to, sort of like get the shot. And it depends upon the network and the timing, what's going on, but there's just, more of a history where networks, we did The Shield with Sean up front, where he was just a producer on Angel, and basically, Kevin was willing to give him a shot. It was just his gut. And nowadays, there's a lot of cable networks doing stuff, and I feel like if they feel somebody has a voice, they'll find, potentially, a Joel Fields who's a showrunner but can come in and partner, or there's just tons of examples. But you have a lot of opportunity in cable, I think, to break out. Or if you do a network, which is a high-class problem, it's just a different political animal.
Kristin, what skills do you feel that you could advise people to develop if they, get that first staff gig? What is the, you were working with a partner, so you were already used to a lot of collaboration.
Right.
But now you're in a writer's room and you're surrounded by other writers. What's that shift like?
It's another level of collaboration, and it's really tuning into the showrunner and Jason ultimately had a vision for what the season, and certainly the season, which is the farewell season, as they call it. Tuning it, learning how to read his cues and what he's looking for. Breaking story with everybody in the room, that's a very different experience than just the two of us kicking ideas back and forth. It's fantastic.
Yeah, one of the things that, when we had that first meeting with Jason, we asked him, we asked him kind of what the process was, what his process was, how it worked. And then we asked him if he had any concerns, and he said, he said it's not common that we have feature writers who have your level of experience coming in at such a low level, staff writer level. And is that something that you guys can deal with? Basically, our egos, can we deal with it? And
we said yes.
Yes. we
absolutely can.
Yeah, our motto to him, and it was true how we presented ourselves in the room, was basically like, look, we have a lot to learn, we have a lot to offer, and we're excited to do both things. And so, we both loved being in the room, and we had a wonderful experience on that show, and it's almost over.
Well, actually, I'll say this: one of the best pieces of advice we got was listen. really listen your first week. You know, how are people pitching ideas? What's getting put on the board? Just soak it all in.
Yeah, there was we definitely read a whole bunch of Parenthood scripts, not just before we wrote our first episode, but just leading up, just trying to immerse ourselves. We watched, obviously, we had actually both been watching it already, but rewatched everything. And yeah, one of the pieces of advice we got from a writer friend was basically like, as staff writer, you obviously don't want to be talking over everybody, but you also don't want to be, wallflower. You want to be somewhere in the middle and take your time. You don't have to dive in right away. I, of course, dove in right away. That's the way I am. But that was really good advice. Was basically like, there's going to be an occasion where there's an idea that the showrunner might throw up or the number two might throw up that on the wall that you're just like, oh, really? Are we going to do that? And it's like, it's fine. If it doesn't work, inevitably, everyone will come around to it, and so you have to kind of, it is trust and listen,
Graham, I hear you fire staff writers left and right. What's your advice for people getting in the room? How can people be successful if they, cross over from features? They're now in a writer's room. What are the skills that you think, helps people stick, on a staff so they can grow up and develop and become their own creators and showrunners? But, what are some common mistakes you see for staff writers and from staff writers, and what advice would you have if somebody's finally in a room with, 6, 7 other people and they've spent, an entire career just dealing with executives and writing scripts by themselves, and now suddenly they're working with other writers?
I would basically just say what he just said, which is, you really have to read the temperature of the room and just listen for a while. We have a writer on the show, VJ Boyd, who started as an office PA in the first season, and then we put him in through the diversity hire program in the second season. So now he was sitting in the room, and he said maybe 3 or 4 words all year. I mean, that was it. He just sat and listened. Fred Golan and I looked at each other and was like, what? Well, we might as well bring him back. He's a great guy, so we bring him back. Well, he's he's a go-to writer now as we are in our final season, and he was just listening, and just sort of, and we were willing to take the time, and thank God we did. Do I really have a reputation for firing people?
Just
No,
bullshit. Yeah, it was just
because I'd like that reputation. Yeah, it's all so strange, and how things work out, and some people can really pitch their hearts out in the room and really contribute, and then the script maybe isn't what you were hoping for, and every show has such a distinctive voice now. People have come off our show and gone on and done very well on other shows that just they're a better fit, and so it's really, really hard to predict.
I would offer this to people who are trying to get in the writer's room is, focus on the showrunner's vision. The showrunner's the person who really, helps, they develop the show. They see the entire process from start to finish. They see people come up with the idea. They see it pitched. They see it developed. They see it written, worked on, with the executives, the directors, the actors. They cut it. They go all the way to sound. So they are really, like the filmmaker in a way that the director is, say, in the, from start to finish, probably in a feature film sense. So they are seeing it for a much longer run. And part of the thing is that people, the writer's room works on one piece. So sometimes a showrunner might come in and say, okay, we're going to do this. And the room goes, really? Well, the issue is that, maybe the room is calling for, we want these 2 characters together. They're going to have a discussion, da-da-da. And the showrunner's coming from the editing room, and they're like, I'm sick of those characters. We've had them on screen too much. We got to loosen some up. They just, are responding to a lot more information than the writers are. And so it's difficult when you come into a room and you feel, you're like, okay, I got a great idea for a scene, and I think, we'll have a The guy wakes up and there's a horse's head in the bed, and he's covered with blood. And the writer's room is like, well, who put the horse's head there? How did they carry it up? Why didn't the guy wake up? Why is there no blood on the floor? There's a lot of reasons that scene doesn't work. So don't do that, okay? Right? Let me turn it over to these guys. You know, you're looking for a pilot. You know, you're either looking to develop or to sell or maybe to attach to or whatever. And you want to get a sense of character. You want to get a sense of an interesting world. You know, you do, right? Because so that you differentiate the show from other shows. But, you know, you want a so you want stuff set up, but you also want to make sure that it's satisfying, you know? So what do you consider? How do you balance that?
We always try to say that it's like the pilot is like the tip of the iceberg. You want a sense that there's an iceberg under the water, but you don't need to see all of it. And we want to end with questions. I mean, The Shield's a great example of questions that will pull you into the second episode. You know, not questions that repel you, like, what the hell is going on? This is just too much work. But we don't want to give everything away. As I said, we don't want you to lay pipe. We don't want a premise pilot. We don't want eyes in characters. We want to crash into a world. We feel like audiences are really sophisticated now, and they want to sort of be like, they don't want to be ahead of everything. And so the main goal for us is to really get them to connect to that character or characters and be like, I got to show up every week and see, like you said, what's this guy going to do, or what's this girl going to do, or what are they going to do? If you can accomplish that, I mean, I think we debate all the time. Should we leave this for the second episode? Should we not? But I do think that there should be a holy shit, even if it's not in the form of a cliffhanger, but a character move. You know, we're looking for that character inciting incident that launches that arc. And that, look, in the Americans, it's really subtle. They're falling in love. They've been together. You crash in 15 years together. They're undercover. It's the height of the Cold War. FBI agent moves in across the street. Is that coincidence? Body in the trunk, defecting. And it's like the inciting incident is like, we're just starting to fall in love. Well, oops, he wants to defect. She's a loyalist. Now we have to kill other people. We still have to screw other people. And it's a show about a marriage. Like, it knows what its North Star is. And you come back to that show because you want to know what happens in that marriage. You know, and the procedural stuff in our shows is really in the background, and it's there to support that character journey. So it's like setting that up, I think.
Larry, what were you going to?
I guess I mean, some people are stronger at plot. Some people have, maybe better at dialogue. I mean, I guess we're always looking for that type of, originally that voice that we feel that has got a rhythm in a pilot that we can then help develop. If it's weak on plot or doesn't have as much, drive, we can help it. But we're looking for some sort of that voice that we think people want to hear. And that's, kind of vague, but that's what we're looking for. It's that type of character, that type of world that that we just, feel like it's unique. So,
yeah, I'll give you an example. I spoke in a panel once, and this woman described a script that she had written. Okay, and so in the script there was a soldier. He's out in the field, and he and his guys are attacked and they're killed, and he's the sole survivor, and he finds out that it's like a Blackwater type thing that a hit. So he tries to go after Blackwater, and he goes to a congresswoman and tries to get her to like defund the program or whatever. That doesn't work, and so then he joins the Blackwater, and he's going to lay in wait and take them down. Okay, so that was the script. I said, all right, well, let's look at it. So you have a really cool opening, and gives him an emotional drive. Now he wants to, kill Blackwater. Great. All of that. He takes action. He goes to the congresswoman. She says no. There's a great obstacle. And so then he goes and sits down in an office and waits. That's not good enough. That's not, that's not going to get you a job. That's not going to sell. That's not interesting. If that was, Vic Mackey or Tony Soprano or Kevin Spacey, he'd go back, he'd kill the congresswoman, he'd crush Blackwater, and you go, wow, that guy's fucking loose. I want to see what he does next week. You see what I'm saying? So she pushed the climax of that story she was telling too far down the road. So I'm just left hanging, and it's very well written. But, if you're going up against 120 writers for a staffing gig, the one or two people who are landing a story in those 60 pages, they're getting the meetings, they're getting the story, Most people are kind of writing that. That's my experience. So that's what I'm talking about, looking for the payoff within the script itself. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Yes, over there.
So, Larry, you started to ask about it a minute ago. And Nicole, are you going to read a spec pilot by someone who is currently unrepresented and is looking for, I think they can hear me, and is looking for management? Nicole, are you going to read a spec pilot from someone who's currently unrepresented?
I'm not going to read, I'm not legally able to read one that's unsolicited. But what I would say about this, and I'm sure Larry would agree, as an agent, I got this question all the time. And I would say save the unsolicited submission. I used to say save the paper, now it's just an email. But that is not the route to go. The route to go is you guys live here, you know people, you know cousins of assistants, you know people who know people, you know people who work at coffee shops who know people. Get everybody to read your script and get them to recommend it, because if my assistant's here, if his cousin read a great script and recommended it to him, and he read it and recommended it to me, we're going to send you a release and then I'll read it. So it's just cream rises is the sort of the moral of the story.
Very well said. I mean, it's basically just kind of like using your resources to basically figure out how to get the best intro to somebody. And because we can't take unsolicited material, it's like just hustle. And the hustle is figure out the 6 degrees of separation. And if you can do that, then we're open to, reading it once we get a release. So it's all about that, using resources.
Okay. Ray, did you have a question?
Yeah. There we go, obviously. So I've got my pilot written. I'm trying to figure out right now pitch Bibles. I'm trying to figure out how much I need to bring in and how much I need to leave open for a producer or a studio that I'm going to talk to that they want to collaborate with. I have a fair sense of 4 or 5 seasons. I got a really good sense of the arc of the first season, but how much detail?
It's a great question. What do you want to say?
I would say you kind of have to fill out your room. I think you should know it all. I think the more you know, the better. The more you know your subject matter. And if we're talking about a pitch, are we talking about what to do in a pitch or what to do just written material going?
Well, we've been talking about write a great pilot. So I think my pilot's great. It's written and it's done. If you read it, then and I get a meeting, what do I need to bring to that?
I think if I've read your pilot, right, if it got submitted and then I say, okay, come on in, I want to talk to him about where the show goes. There's that brass ring version where I'm like, just buy it. I can see where it goes. You know what I mean? But otherwise, it's like, yeah, I want to meet this guy. I don't know him. He's new on the scene. To be able to come in and talk about your show is pretty unbelievable. Like, can I name specific examples, or is this it would be too touchy?
No, there's a cone of silence here. We would like, just be mindful that these folks here are donating their time and their expertise. So, and we do this, I should have said this at the beginning, but we do this here, at the Writers Guild to try to support our members. So really, if somebody, says something or whatever, and I'm not saying you're going to say anything, but, just be mindful that at any guild function, if you go out and you post something on Facebook or you tweet it or you repeat it or whatever, it just makes people very hesitant to kind of come and offer their advice to help people. So please respect, everything that we're saying here. Okay, thank you.
Well, slightly protect the innocent. So a spec came through with a feature producer who didn't really have any credits. The script was awesome. And my entire team read it. We thought it was fantastic. And we were like, we got to know. And it had the right, got to know what happens in the second episode. Bring this guy in. He literally sat there in a flop sweat and had no idea what his show was. No idea. And it was heartbreaking because this is so rare. It's like the unicorn spec, right? And it was like, you can't write the show for them. I've learned, you want to, but you just can't, and I said part of it was you want to know people can be showrunners, and this guy was just falling apart and had time to work with this producer, and they couldn't figure it out. And about 6 months later, John called me, Landgraf, and said, hey, have you heard about this script? And the script was now coming back in with a huge production company and a showrunner that could support him. And I was like, yes, in fact, we did. And it was so sad that we had passed on it. We had no idea what the series is. So let's all sit down and hear what it was. And they went around to every network and did the big Dog and Pony show. And they still didn't know what their series was. And it sold. And we actually jumped in, and because there was enough support to think like we could kind of feel where it could go, and you had the support. He wasn't alone, and it ended up selling someplace else. And I don't think it's on the air, and I don't think they ever found their series. But, so know it and have it be really good. That helps.
And I would say it's really important to know why you want to tell this story. Not just it's cool, it's a great idea, but if you're writing it, I mean, you're in the room, you're living this. I'm doing a show right now, and I can't shut it off. I'm just thinking about this and that, and you have to live in that. And so and when I talk about that show, people can see that I care about that show on a deeply meaningful way. You know what I'm saying? So that's what you want to convey, and if you met with, Vince Gilligan talking about Breaking Bad, he didn't know. He had this, Mr. Chips become Scarface, which he said to death and everything. And but but he didn't know. If you ask him, he's like, I just knew I wanted this journey, which you described, Did you want to say something?
I was going to say that I just think that off what Nicole's saying is that you just have to be, as long as you basically know, you get the shot, you go into the network team, cable or network, and you get the shot. As long as you're, you have, not every beat, but you're able to sort of like get into the dialogue with, and we had a situation, with a network president who basically, we took out a pitch and we didn't sell it. A young writer, journalist from the East Coast, we didn't sell it. We had her write on spec. She wrote it. We ended up submitting it back to one of the networks who passed. They wanted to buy it. We went into the network president who wanted to meet her. We had a meeting in her office with 10 other people, and she really auditioned our client. It was incredibly not uncomfortable. It was incredibly comfortable, but there was like maybe, like 10 or 15% of the script she wanted to like zero in on and had questions about. And she was just obviously auditioning her and feeling her out. And the writer just knocked it out of the park. There was a connection, done. So it's a lot of it just getting that shot. And
your Bible's probably going to change. It's going to change probably, but it's that confidence.
Yeah, and I see the Bible as, what is the tone of the show? Not necessarily, here's where we end Act 2, Season 2, Season 3, or whatever. But, what does the show feel like? Is it gritty? What's the narrative drive? Are you using, flashbacks or whatever? And there are Bibles out there that I think are well done. I think the True Detective Bible was well done. You really got a sense of the vision of the show for that. So it doesn't necessarily need to be about plot. It just needs to be about a document about what the heart of your show is, I guess I'm trying to say. Yes, did you have a question?
Obviously, you have a way of thinking after working in features for years. And if you're thinking about getting into TV, I'm sure there are things where you're just like, you hear it from a TV writer, or you see it on a page from a feature writer, and just like, oh my God, this is such a feature thing to do that wouldn't be done in TV.
I don't really see that in the material. If it's a feature writer, I'll read the features, so I feel like that's okay. But let me ask the people who have made the crossover.
Well, one thing I would say is don't come into any of those rooms thinking, pretending to know more than you know. Be honest about we're new to this part of the business. As Ian and I said, talk to every TV writer you know and ask them how they got their start. Some of the other tips we got were, don't be the guy in the room who blows up everything.
Yeah.
When an idea is pitched, let it live, let it circulate with everybody. It might be bad, it might be wrong, but don't be the guy that always says no. Don't repitch and repitch and repitch. Meaning, if you pitch something and it's not picked up by the room, let it go. Don't be the guy who's just drilling. So, that's the kind of advice we got from people who were already in the jobs that we wanted, and we just tried to take that all to heart.
I one of the things I'm obsessive about, a lot of podcasts, and I kind of, for like the last 2 years, was listening to a lot of these Nerdist Writers Panel podcasts, which are fantastic, and you learn a tremendous amount. It's just writers, TV writers talking about the job. There's another one that I can't recommend highly enough called Children of Tendu, that that is like 12 episodes or something, like 13, and it literally is just like nuts and bolts. It's like going to school for writing on staff and writing on a TV show, and like they literally take you through every element of it, and it's fantastic.
Not to gain 20 pounds.
No, not that.
Also, when you're in a room, you do want to be, additive. Okay, so you don't want to, and listen, there's most of what we do, all of what we do as writers is problem solving. There's nothing on a page. We got to figure it out. So there's, and you're searching for it. So, I was in my room yesterday and there was a writer who said, well, I think it's just, this idea, I've seen it done well, I've seen it done poorly. Is there something better we can do? And my attitude is, well, that's your fucking job. Give me a solution, come up with some pitches, yeah, we're working on it. Like, I know it sucks.
Don't just point out the problems.
Yeah, like
don't just kind of like, oh, that
me
doesn't
out.
work.
There's more than enough work to go around. That's one thing. But also what you said is, I do think that sometimes, I've worked on a number of shows, and sometimes you do have feature people who come over and they look down on TV, even though there's a lot of cool action going on, particularly on cable, and people want to go over to TV, but they frown upon network TV or something, or they feel like it's beneath film. So then they go, okay, well, we're going to show you how it's done. And it's like, well, that's okay. We're making a lot of good TV without you. So just a little humility. It's fine. We know you wrote a blockbuster. All good. We're happy to have you. Help us figure out the story. So just be careful that when you cross over, TV writers are sensitive. That even though this is the golden age of TV, or the second after yours. They are sensitive.
Glen is sensitive.
Yes, I'm very sensitive. But that film, that there's a thing about the film writers feeling like they're the cool kids, and then the TV, it's all horseshit. We're all just goofy writers, and nobody wants us around. But anyway, so just be humble.
Yeah, but not every feature writer comes in thinking they're fantastic. I mean, the other thing is for a feature writer coming into a writer's room is to breathe deep and enjoy the fact that you're not being treated as like an idiot by a director or a producer. Yes. You're going to be treated like an idiot by other writers, and that's so much better. No, but that is a big thing. There is a feeling of okay, now I'm part of the team that is actually respected to a degree on this show. That if we don't do our job, there is no show. So that counts for a lot.
Yeah, I will say that the kind of the mind-blowing experience of the first time on TV was like there is such a difference between what we had been doing in features, which is basically working with non-writing producers, non-writing executives, and then being in a room of just writers where you all kind of speak the same language about story that is just so great. And couldn't really get enough of that.
Let's talk about the rewrite process, because in features you turn in your work and then you're fired, and then somebody else rewrites you. This is you're in a room and the person next to you could be asked to rewrite you, or the showrunner may rewrite you or whatever. But your name could stay on the script, or your name is never taken off the script and might get shared with somebody else. So what was your experience like with going through that? Because usually it happens after you're off the job, but now you're being rewritten while you're there.
Well, what's interesting is we had a very unique experience in that we weren't really massively rewritten. Jason did do, a fair amount of sort of polishing at the end, but he kind of just felt like we were in sync with his voice and that we got the show. And he also does not have an ego. He didn't feel a need like I have to put my thumbprint on everything. If something doesn't work, he will throw it out. And he certainly did rewriting as stuff got into production and you realize, oh, we're not going to have that actor anymore. We lost him, so that character's got to go. Things like that.
He would come he was great in that it was, we would get notes on stuff, and he would have us do our own rewriting. Listen, we certainly, as feature writers on that show, there was one moment very early on where somebody else in the room, because it was a largely new staff season 5. So first of all, Jason actually sat down and kind of gave a 45-minute speech about his expectations, and we were both so naive, this is so great. They just tell you what it's supposed to be, and Gina, who is a co-EP, is like, this never happens, never. But one of the other executive producers, somebody asked, have you ever really had to rewrite a script? He's like, well, we had these feature writers on who didn't know what the fuck they were doing, and we had to completely rewrite them. We were like, alrighty. But we were lucky in that it was really a perfect fit for us, this show, and we really clicked with the characters and everybody in the room. So we had a great, they loved our first script, and that was great. And we actually got the opportunity to rewrite somebody else's. So Jason actually had us rewrite another writer's script, which was kind of very meant a lot to us and was not common on that show. That other writer actually came into our office immediately and was just like, I just want you guys to know I'm so happy you guys are doing this. And he was so awesome and classy about it and great, and there was really no weirdness in the room because of that. So, I think there's a way to handle that kind of a situation, which is basically we're all on the same team. And it is like a job in that you get a new job and it's just, I want to do whatever the showrunner needs. We want to be the go-to people. So whatever that, we're, 24/7, what do you need? That was our attitude.
Graham, what's your rewrite process?
It's I don't know. Now we're in our final season. We've sort of fallen into a groove. There are senior writers. There's always a senior writer on every script, and so they kind of have the run of it. And I'll give notes and maybe tweak a line or something like that. But back in the first season, before Ben Cavell really emerged, and then another writer and got a freelance in, I was doing a lot of rewriting, and it was just I didn't see it being sustainable. But then the show eventually sort of came together. But, I've been on the other side. I've been rewritten in features, but also my first job after Hey Dude and after Full House was on this Norman Lear show, Powers That Be, that was created by Kaufman and Crane. And that was my first experience of turning in a first draft. And then everyone's coming in, man, this is fantastic. This is great. That run, everything. And then we sit at the table and we turn it to page 1. And it's like, so down at the bottom here, can we do better than that? And I'm thinking, if I could fucking do better than that, I would have done better than that. What are you talking? Then you get over it. And by the afternoon, I was pitching as hard as everyone else. And there is going to be an ego blow if you're told you're going to be rewritten. There's no question. And as a showrunner, it's my job to, try and help with that. It's the reality is it's got to get done. So.
You mentioned freelance. Larry, what's your experience with going for freelance spots? When I started on Nash Bridges, over 15 years ago, that's how I got in. I don't think that spot is as open to the general populace as it was. Now it seems to be kind of locked up for the script coordinators and writers' assistants.
There's so few available. So you've got a script coordinator or a writer's assistant who's been there for 3 or 4 years, and they're kind of like, if the showrunners wants to give them a shot, feels good about it, they're going to give them that shot. So we don't really play the freelance world as much as we used to. It definitely is tighter, much more closed up. Sometimes there'll be a situation where you've got, again, you wrote in a staff 2 or 3 years ago, and somebody's on a new show, and they'll call up 4 or 5 people to come in and audition for the showrunner because there's a connection. And so you get like an invitation to come in and meet the showrunner or come in to pitch. And that will turn out to be some great stories. So, we had somebody came in, worked with Tommy Moran on NCIS, a guy named John Kelly, went and pitched for David Shore on House, and he wrote a freelance, became co-EP the next 2 years, and got back in, so it was a great opportunity. This is a good story. So you can definitely turn it into something.
Cool. Sir?
Yeah, understanding that it's all in the execution. In features, we're used to being told by buyers that there are genres that are hot Sorry. In understanding that it's all in the execution and features, we've been used to hearing when genres are hot or cold. Can you guys comment a little bit about that in terms of when your eyes light up or kind of grow gauzy when you hear another zombie series or another vampire series, or what makes you interested in terms of genre at this point?
Well, I think I was talking about it a little bit earlier. It's not, the genre is it's secondary. The characters in the foreground. Really, what we're looking for, if anyone's talking about a genre, is how is it subverted? How is it surprising? How is it, the new take, whether that's through tone or structure, or character, whatever that might be. It's very hard. My job is hard because it's not, people say, what do you want? What do you want? It's so vague. Like I can say, gosh, we don't have sci-fi, but that doesn't mean, features comes from concept first and sort of works backwards and figures out character and rewrites character at the end. It's the inverse for cable TV. And I can't really speak to network, about what's going on there. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of sort of, there are opportunities to sort of chase feature trends in networks, or, sometimes I wonder if that's just collective unconscious or if it's conscious. But for us, it's really, really, really sad. It's not going to be enough. It's just not going to be enough, because I'll get that call like, what do you think about this mashup? And it's like, well, what's the character journey? Who's the character? Who am I following?
There. You're a first-time showrunner. You're stepping into that seat. What are the first set of problems you need to figure out, I assume, in a hurry?
Well, you have experience in this too. The first thing is hiring writers. I mean, that's the absolute first thing, because you've already cast it, in the pilot. So when are you talking about that stage? Because it all sort of, it backs up to pitching and all that stuff, and then finding a director for the pilot and casting it and going through all that rigmarole, which is, especially if you're on the network schedule, then it's just this feeding frenzy, and you're trying to convince yourself that Danny Bonaducci is the lead of this show, when you'd written it for Sam Elliott. But anyway, that's, but then it's finding writers, and you rely heavily on the people at the network and the studio, and often your own agents, and it's just a lot of reading. So, and that's the first thing.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, because the writer's room is also where the showrunner's going to hang out, okay? Because it's really no fun producing the show. You're dealing with, producers, and everybody's got an issue, and and it's all, but writers, we're all cut from the same cloth. So you're talking story, and that's what we love to do. So you want to make sure that you have really talented people that are, great to hang out with, and if that's going well, you can feel that the show is going to be good and everything else will fall into place. The show does get produced, but if the story's not breaking and people can't stand each other, and there's 4 different, and you've hired because you didn't do your due diligence on the writers, and you kind of slap together a staff to get it going quickly, that's, you're not going to have confidence in that material. So it really is about, I think, finding the right writers, and then once that vision is built out, you'll find the right people to produce it, right?
So just a
go
quick
ahead.
follow-up.
Follow up?
So I hear all the writers saying, if you can get the writing under control, you'll find a way to take care of the rest. And I wonder, from a network perspective, if that's kind of your concern with a first-time showrunner.
Oh, definitely. And again, finding, this is territory we've covered, but finding that organic fit with people who are going to really, really support that vision. And the thing you don't want, and we really are active about not standing for that, is divisive sort of if you have a bad political environment on your show, it's going to affect your script, it's going to affect your show. So it starts with who you pick. Sometimes, sometimes you have to make changes, but the primary, the golden goose is the showrunner with the vision and the voice. So you got to protect that.
Okay. Yes, Miss, right here.
Hi. I still find that there's this borderline between getting invited to pitch ideas, I've even sold pilots and trying to get on staff. That there's still, they want to staff TV people. They love you as a feature writer. They know you're a great writer, but they want it. They want that sure thing, which is someone who's already been on a staff. And you might all be different because you're here as part of this panel, but would you say that there are either executives at networks or showrunners who just, the first choice is find someone who's done TV?
Well, certainly some people feel that way, but I have to say this is such a phenomenal moment in time for people to be crossing over. It's just when you look at the numbers that Ari talked about when we started, we have a really hard time staffing our shows. I mean, we have a really hard time staffing our shows. So I think if you can, because there just aren't, either somebody already has their show, you know what I mean, on the air, or if they're good, they're on a show. There's so many, what is it, like almost 300 scripted shows right now, dramas. So it's just, I think that if you can find someone who's great, and again, that cream rises theory, I really do believe in. I can only speak for FX, but I know I talk to my colleagues at other networks. We're all dying to find those new people and put them in, and I think it's just, there's so much opportunity.
Yeah. Larry?
I would say there's definitely going to be some showrunners, because their budget, because of where they're at in their head, are going to definitely say, listen, I'm going to have a top-heavy staff, which is 3 or 4 or 5 level people. I'm not going to hire any baby writers. I can't afford to take the time with this show to hire somebody green. Absolutely, it happens. I'd say it's rare. I'd say it's a small percentage. I'd say most of the staffs right now, depending upon how they're configured, because every staff is configured differently, is basically open to new voices. It might be 1 new voice, might be 2 new voices, but definitely open. And sometimes we just put a few people on the staff right now on a Stars show. They hired 3 writers. Not 1 person is written on staff ever. But then again, the director and the showrunner have no TV experience either.
Good luck.
So,
I just hired 5 writers, and 4 of them are staff writers, first-time staff writers. Because, but then again, I've been a showrunner before. If I was a new showrunner, I would want more experienced staff, to kind of fill that gap. So it's because the showrunner's trying to think about what are his or her strengths, what do they need to shore up, that sort of thing. So I think it's going to be about individual cases, to tell you the truth. But I do think that there's opportunity because budgets are tighter. And you can get 2 or 3 staff writers instead of 1 big co-EP or whatever. So I'd rather skew that way, but maybe that's just me thinking. Did you have a question in orange? Yeah.
I was wondering. Nicole, you gave a wonderful example of a new writer who was coming in for a pitch the first time and blew it with the flop sweat. I was wondering if you had an example of someone who did the exact opposite, someone who came in for the first time, who just knocked it out of the park, and what it was that they did that was right. Did they have the right? Did they bring in attachments? Did they bring in visuals? Did they?
You know what? It's funny. The agencies are sort of working at cross purposes with us because they want the packages, they want to package it up, they want to control it, and they want to go straight to series, right? Which for showrunners is like, great, we're going to get our show in the air. We really believe in the pilot process, in terms of being able to stop down and look and reevaluate and figure out what the series is going to be. Maybe you thought a character was going to die that now lives, or maybe you need to recast, or you need to, So I'm off on a tangent. Come back to your question. I can't think of someone who'd never sold a show that's done that offhand of the shows that have just of this first wave of shows that I've been involved in. But what did happen was Stephen Falk, who came in, and I think he shares this in common with everybody, is that he came in and he sat down and he said, I really, he kind of talked about where he was at in his love life and basically said, I love Mad About You and I want to do a fucked up Mad About You with a narcissist and a liar. And then he proceeded, and this doesn't always happen because not everyone always pitches out every beat of their pilot. In fact, rarely. He literally he just pitched the pilot and it was like, write that. and he turned it in like 6 weeks later, and then we were making it. Was just one of those magical situations. But what I will say is that like Andrew Gerlin, or, they were writing what they know. Their point of view was so clear because he is Jimmy. Andrew Gerlin is Nat Faxon is Andrew Gerlin. I think that was like the really potent thing that you can't bottle.
Glenn, I wanted to just follow up a little bit on what this lady's question about, specifically not just about people who haven't staffed before, but is there a prejudice against film people staffing? Because I think there is to some degree. I think there's skepticism about the work ethic and the work rate that movie people will bring to a staff job. And I think with Ian and Kristin, we have a really good example of people who approached it in a very impressive and effective way. But I think as a showrunner myself, what a film person has to show to me is that they understand that this is hard work, it's teamwork, and it's not, it's a very different experience than most feature writers have experienced up to that point. And so it's not so much that they're not capable of writing it, it's a question of they're willing to really be part of that process and work that hard, frankly. It's not that you don't work hard when you write a feature, but you're doing it on your own time, or you're doing it on a much different basis. And I think one other thing to support something that Larry said is that, writing a pilot is a very tough thing, even for experienced writers to do. And I think there's a little bit of a bifurcation here about what the purpose of writing a pilot is. Clearly you want to write it, but it is very often the calling card that gets you into the position to shovel coal for a while and learn, and there's a lot to learn. And sometimes I think feature writers also bring this Hail Mary attitude to the business, which is, I'll write the pilot, I'll be at the top of the pyramid, and I'm done. When in fact, the more common experience to people who write pilots and have never worked in TV before and they get made is they're made some sort of staff writer or some sort of lower producer, but very often they flush themselves out because they really don't understand how the work is done and how much work it is. So
yeah, I'll say this. I mean, we feel like as Parenthood is ending, so we're about to go back out into the world, and we both feel so much more prepared because we have 2 seasons worth of experience in a writer's room. So to be able to kind of go out with our own project, we were very much like, we want to learn. Yeah. We were really very eager to learn this side of the business and had, truly no attitude. But we had a more humbling experience in features.
This is for you, Larry. Keeping in mind the cone of silence, we'll say this is a hypothetical situation that's happening to me. Hypothetically, you talk about unskilled feature people getting involved in television. There's a piece of talent they bought a show from that they're particularly enamored with. This person's also a celebrity, so the network needs this person to trot them out. They need them involved. They can't push them aside. And the person doesn't take television that seriously. They're juggling features and things like that. I met with a person and they were pontificating, saying there are no rules with this. I asked him, what do you think your show is about? How would you describe, what is the show about? He said it's about a half hour. Given the lack of work, and given somebody like myself who has a lot of experience in TV, would you tell a client, because there are a lot of shows that are being announced on the air that are getting mysteriously pulled for various reasons, and obviously some of those budget, but there's some times where people don't know what they're doing, and a network just can't have any patience anymore. If you saw a situation like this, would you tell a client to go in, and you talk about showrunners and people trying not to take over, would you say try to enforce some discipline or rules under this and experience of TV? Or would you tell a client this could be a train wreck, avoid it?
Maybe the latter. I think that you're trying to talk about specifically going in with a pitch?
No. This is a series that's on the air.
Oh, a series that's on the air, I see.
With a feature talent that's also a celebrity. And so, and it didn't test well. The pilot didn't test well, which is complicating this. But they're going with it because this is a popular name and it's a brand. But there's a lot of problems, and somebody's going to have to come in and take control of this and not listen to the Land of Lala features. And It also could be a train wreck. It also conceivably could get pulled. But I'm just asking you, would you look at that objectively in this climate and tell somebody, don't go in there, it could be damaging?
Well, I think that, again, we've had situations where clients have been in that situation where we advised them not to do something, where they were basically going into a situation with, a feature piece of talent, and we thought it was a train wreck personality-wise and such. And certain clients, who Glen knows, found the challenge, almost embraced it. And they're really good at multitasking. They had a show on the air. They wanted to have another show on the air. They had 2 shows on the air. They wanted to have 3 shows on the air. And not from a power point of view, but they felt they could help. And they also didn't want to let down the studio. They have a relationship with the studio. So a lot of times, we've given advice that not necessarily is being taken. So it's a lot of times where the head of the showrunner is, and if they really feel the passion, they really feel they can go in and basically fix something, then, we can feel like, or we think it's a train wreck, but basically they're going to take that swing. They're going to go in.
And listen, I've done a lot of train wrecks. Okay, I've been run over by a lot of trains. So the thing is, do you think you're gonna be able to contribute? Okay, like, do you see the answer? Do you say, like, hey, I can write the hell out of that show, and I've got a vision for that show, and I can bring something to it. And then that's one thing. And then 2, what are you being hired for? Are you being hired to keep the star happy? Are you being hired to run the show? Are you being hired to handle production? So you want to be very specific and know what you're getting into, you know what I'm saying? So, I'll say this, that a lot of times when I find in my career, when I've done something for strategy, this is a good piece of business, or this is something, you get about 60% of the lift that you expect, you know what I'm saying, if it's a win, okay? If you do something because you care about it, you love it, it's either going to work or not, but at least you had a great time and you got to say something that was meaningful and artistic and important to you. It just works out. It's always a win on your terms. You see what I'm saying? So I would kind of judge it like that. Like, what are you going for as a creative person? What do you hope to get out of it? If you can get it, go for it. If it's just because it's a good gig, probably better off passing and getting another gig somewhere, Other questions? Anybody? Yes, over there.
Hey, thank you. So this is just more of a general question, and it's about balance. I think it used to be that writers' work primarily came to them, they did what was in front of them, and now we're much more entrepreneurial and choosing what to do with our time. And so what I'm wondering about, first of all, is just how much more hours is it in a day to work in TV than in film? And also, can writers do both? Or do you really need to focus on one for a given chunk and then move to the other?
Graham, do you want
to? It's working in TV is a bigger time commitment. There's no question, especially if, on staff, especially if you're a showrunner. I work a good 30, 40 hours a week. And no, it can be a bigger commitment. I mean, it depends where you are in the feature and if it's heading toward production and you're doing weekend rewrites and all of that. But you don't get to structure your time. I mean, being a feature writer, just in terms of having a life with a family and seeing your family and all of that, is a much, much better life. However, you're one of the lowest, you're below craft services in terms of what the director thinks of you. Now, that's not the case every time, but there's just that, and the Lord spake and said that directors get features and writers get TV, and that's how it shall be, And so there is just something about going into TV and being part of the writer's world, which is, being in that room. There's nothing like it when it's really going well. It's one of the greatest creative experiences you can ever have. But there are different lives. And can you do both? I think this was said earlier on. If you're working on cable and you're doing 10 to 15 episodes a year, yeah, you can do both, because you might get 3 or 4 or 5 months off. That is a different problem, which is if you're working at cable and it's a 10-episode order, it's hard to sustain a life on that, especially living in Los Angeles. A dear friend of mine, Rami Obashan, ran the second 2 seasons of Falling Skies. I helped out on the first season. And it was just so hard for him to hold on to the writers because he was only doing 10 episodes. And because they would have to go and try and get another job to fill out the year. So, there is that balance there too as well.
What about the two of you?
We've been able to juggle both. I mean, again, we've been super lucky, on this show in particular because the hours are ridiculously awesome. Again, everybody on the staff was like, "It's never like this. Enjoy it." So and we broke season 5. We broke the season very quickly, and the writers' room broke very early. So we got to continue to get a paycheck, and we would get an episode. We wrote 3 episodes, rewrote a 4th the first season. There's only 13 episodes this season. We've done our 2 already. So, and the writer's room's broken. So we've been very lucky in that regard and have been able to balance it. When we were on the show, though, that is the number one priority. That's it. So, I mean, while we were in the writer's room, I mean, we would and that was definitely an adjustment, I will say, coming from features. Because we work 5-6 days a week. We put in full days, and we, within, I think 6 weeks in of season 5, we were like, holy shit, if I have to fucking think about the Bravermans for another 5 minutes, holy moly, this is intense. And, the way we worked in that room was just, Jason was in there, and it was like you work straight through lunch. It was always, we just work. There's no real, you take a short break here or there, but you're in. But, we were out by 5:30 every day, so 6.
Someone once said you can tell the state of the showrunner's marriage by how late you stay.
I'm doing both TV and a feature now, and it's tough because creatively, what's nice about TV is you're in that world, and so then the ideas kind of pop and they come to you, and then when you're off writing a feature, you're in that world, and you're kind of thinking about the character while you're driving around or you're in the shower or whatever it is, wherever you do your you're thinking. You never know when an idea comes to you. But so to juggle different projects at the same time is tough because you can only, one of them becomes work, not just the creative environment you're living in. And it becomes stressful because you always have some producer who's not getting what they want. So it's tricky. So it's kind of, a cable life is, you can be in production, and then you could be off writing a script. I'll say, though, if you're on staff and you're working on several projects, you run the risk of, signaling to the showrunner that you're not the priority. They don't care. You don't care about their material. You have other priorities, and that's not good. You really want to feel like you're all in for the showrunner. Any other questions? Yes. Let's do one more.
Can you address at all how this translates to half hour in comedy? Anybody?
I mean, I've been in half-hour rooms, and I never was in a really crazy room. The Powers That Be room was run by Charlotte Brown. There was no table. We sat in comfy couches and had pads, and we're always out by 6 o'clock. It was a really sane half hour. But I've heard of really horrific schedules where people are working till midnight essentially every night for just weeks and months on end. And tapings and stuff like that, or it's a single camera, it's a multi-camera. That is sort of, at least my experience in half hour. It was a much more of a group written thing. We do group breaking, at least on Justified and the stuff you worked on, putting stuff up on the boards and all of that. But with half hour that I was involved with, you turn in the first draft and that's just paper to write on.
Is there any translation comedy feature writer to half-hour shows? I mean, is it the same dynamic we've been talking about, or it doesn't exist?
Depends on what kind. I mean, for sitcoms, it's like 5 jokes a page. It's a different, for a lot of independent film writers transition really well into single camera, half hour. Okay. That's a really good comparison.
Okay, let's
We pull a lot from that whole. We go to film festivals. We pull from all of those people to find new ideas.
So if you had a great idea, a great pilot, but you did not want to be a staff writer because you just didn't want to be there all the time, how would you approach a showrunner or approach someone saying, hey, here's the pilot, here's even a Bible of what could happen, but I don't want to be there?
We're not doing
I don't know
it.
if that happens a lot, but I mean, would anyone talk to you? Or
Not at FX, but other people might.
Graham, do you get this? Do you get people approaching you like, hey, you know, I need you to
I'm
attach
too good
to
for
it?
TV. No,
Yeah, no.
I'm too lazy for TV. I don't know.
they just might have other things.
They might have other things to do. I mean, listen, back in the
Age
day,
thing.
back in the day, there were showrunners, especially in half hour, that were known as creator deserters. I forget who it was. It was a woman who worked with Whit Thomas. Susan Harris, was that it? She created a bunch of shows, and she was a creator deserter, and that was just her reputation. She said, I don't want to run a show. I just like coming up with an idea. I don't know if that really happens so much anymore. It can. We get approached by people who have ideas, who have scripts, and will you be like, you know, with Joe Weisberg? I'm the new term they developed in the past couple of years is Godfather, which is an awesome term because people have to kiss the ring, and it's all fantastic. But you know, so you get approached on that level. Will you lend your name to it? But yeah, I haven't heard recently a lot of
Feature people
just having
first
an
started
idea.
going over when I was an agent. They mostly they were like, can I get in and out in 2 years? Because features were still robust. So they're like, I just want to be out at 2 years. And some would try to get off in 1 year. But it's changed now. People don't want to get off now, you know?
Yeah, and you know, first of all, there's a lot of shows now that are getting picked up. Okay, not by FX or whatever, but other shows. No, I'm serious. But other shows are getting picked up because you have a lot of non-writing producers going around with material, and they're selling the shows, and maybe they've got somebody and they can do the pilot, and then they'll say, oh, and then we'll find the showrunner. Okay, so showrunners are a commodity now, right? So they're in demand. They have their own projects they want to do. And if they're going to attach, they're probably going to attach to a property or a star or something that has, you know, a thing. So a chance of getting on the air. So just, oh, here's a good idea. Here's you know, I've been offered this a lot by, you know, younger writers. Oh, I just need a showrunner. I'm like, well, okay, but I've got my own projects that I'm interested in doing. So I'm sure it's a wonderful idea, but you know, if it's yours, yeah, I have my projects like that, you know. Did you want to say something, Larry? Oh, okay. Larry agrees with me. So, okay. All right. 9 o'clock. Thank you for coming. I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you, everyone.